joining our session.
Yeah.
Kevin, would you like? I think we can start with. Maybe let me do the agenda. So hi, welcome everyone. We're really happy to be here after like 6 months. It was October when we last met, I think, in Salzburg. So good to be able to see all of you again. This is the agenda for today's session, focusing on it's actually a joint session between the interest group and the working group that we co-chair regarding data management plans. The agenda will start with us chairs introducing ourselves. Then we would like to know who you are, and it would be great if you could introduce yourself as well through the Menti that we will show in a minute. We'll have an overview of the groups so that you know more about the active data management plans interest group and the DMP Common Standard Working Group. And then we will share with you some updates of different things that we're doing in relation to the standard, the more technical work of the working group, the Salzburg Manifesto, which talks about, it's co-signed by major DMP, let's say, tools and supporters. So we will talk more about that later, as well as a new project that we would like to share some developments at the EU level, European level. Then we will have a discussion on those and we'll close with next steps and some remarks. So let's start with Tomasz then. We cannot hear you.
To me, okay, because I thought that we were going to do the Menti now, aren't we?
No,
well,
first
we're introducing ourselves and then the Menti.
Okay, so hi. Okay, so sorry. So hi, I'm Tomasz. I'm the chair of the DMP Common Standards Working Group and also co-chair of the Active DMPs Working Group. I've been here already for the last, I don't know, 8 years, as I guess many of you have seen me so far. Now, next Marek, right?
Good.
Yeah.
Next is Marek.
Hello everyone, I'm Marek Suchanek from Czech Technical University in Prague, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the DMP Common Standards Working Group.
Okay. And I'm Kevin Ashley. I'm director of the Digital Curation Centre. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Active Data Management Plans interest group. And if I just mention one thing, you'll see in the chat, there's been a link shared a couple of times. We've got collaborative notes for this session in a Google Doc. Please, it's a joint activity to make sure we got a record of this meeting for others who can't be here.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for reminding us also about this. Maria, unfortunately, is not with us, or is she? I think she's away.
No.
No, she's away. But we also have Maria from the University of California Libraries, and she is also co-chair of the Active Data Management Plans Interest Group, along with me. That I represent Athena Research Center. This is my affiliation in Greece. And yeah, I'm co-chairing this Active DMPs group. Great. Then now that you saw us, it would be good if we went to the Menti and we get to know all of you. So if you go to menti.com and enter the code 1587388, I will now switch to presenting the Menti. Let me do that. Present and share screen. Yeah. hopefully you can see the question now, right? You see the Menti and not
Yeah.
the presentation. Good. So where are you connected from? Because this is a good opportunity. The virtual meetings are always nice because even if you cannot go there, it's easier to, you know, log in and connect through the internet. So I am currently in Delft, Netherlands. But we have Germany, Norway, UK, Sweden, Ireland, US, Slovenia, Singapore, Italy, Edinburgh, Chile, Vienna. So you're logged in from different regions. That's good.
From Japan
Perfect.
to Chile, that's quite a spread of time zones.
Awesome. And nice to have you all here. Let's move to the next. Which domain or research community do you represent? Is it natural sciences? Oh. Is it engineering and technology? Humanities, social sciences, health sciences, or other? And I'm curious to know what other means for you here. Okay, we have health sciences, social sciences, and natural sciences, and then humanities. Maybe you want to share, those of you who responded other, please feel free to unmute and share which domain you represent. Is it multiple domains maybe? That's why you chose other?
That was my reason, and I suspect that's true for many of us who are involved in the support of researchers, that you know, we're supporting researchers from every domain. So that's partly perhaps why there's such an even spread that we're seeing there.
Mm-hmm. I don't see the chat. Maybe the chat is, yeah, RDM community. So it's okay. So yeah, I understand. Okay, let's move on to the next. What type of research data management activity are you mostly involved in? I presume data management planning. But even in data management planning, maybe you are more, you know, you lean more towards one, providing support to one or two than to the whole spectrum of research data management activities. Okay, then we have data preservation, data access, also data reuse, data collection, but mostly data management and data preservation. Let me move on to the next and last question. Are you a member of the working group or the interest group that co-run this session today? If you don't remember, you can check later. I'm going to the website, a new website actually, that RDA launched. And you can see, and if you're not already a member, you can just click the button to join, and it's a simple process. Just log in. You're immediately a member of the working group or interest group. And I'm also curious to know what the other answer is, because maybe there are groups that are, I mean, we know there are groups that are relevant to what we do. I mean, there is a group with specific, domain-specific data management plans, and data stewardship. So maybe would like to know which other working groups or interest groups you follow coming to our session. So feel free to write in the chat or unmute. I see Fair for machine learning in the chat. Professionalization of data stewardship. These are all relevant. And just to answer Kim's question, what's the difference between working groups and interest groups? Interest groups are broader, let's say. Okay, good. Thank you, Kevin. Maybe if you can go ahead.
Well, I'm going to cover that when I explain the history of the groups. So
good. Then I'm stopping sharing this, and you can.
Okay, thanks. So
go ahead.
I've been asked to just spend a few minutes, particularly for those of you who are perhaps newer to this, giving us some context and background as to the history of the groups, how they got set up, why we're in the situation we're in, because hopefully that's going to inform the discussion we're going to have in the rest of this session about where are we going to be going next, or indeed is there a next to go to. So I think it's important to distinguish the groups from the notion of data management planning in general. DMPs are a concept that stretches back many, many decades. And indeed were used in industry before we were familiar with them in research. It's really probably a little over 20 years ago, perhaps more, that really they began to be used seriously in an academic research context. Certainly by 2008, the DCC had issued guidance on how to go about producing them, suggesting that there was already enough activity that we could build on that, and enough interest to make it worth doing that. That was before I joined the DCC. And it was about that time that funders, certainly in the USA and UK, began issuing requirements and recommendations. But by 2010, it was already clear that there was a tension really between the view of a data management plan as an actionable entity, as something that we collected in machines. We had already produced the first of our systems to create data management plans online, and had a view from the outset that we'd be collecting data that was in some way machine actionable. A tension between that view and the view really driven by funder requirements that they were, a human readable document, a set of paragraphs with headings and questions to be answered. And it was difficult to reconcile those two. And at a time, I think, when many researchers wanted to please their funders above all else, there was the view that what they had to do was use those templates the funders had developed. So there were discussions at Plenary 3, I think that was Dublin in 2014, which led to the creation of the Active Data Management Plan Interest Group. Now, interest groups in RDA are long-lived things that don't have a specific task in mind. They don't automatically go away after a period of time. And in many cases, including this one, interest groups are a kind of an umbrella under which particular working groups are set up to deal with shorter term tasks. So the interest group is a way of tying together a related set of activities that are all bound up under one larger concept. You can see examples of that elsewhere in RDA, where individual interest groups have spun off working groups. Working groups, really the first type of group that RDA had when it was set up, are very task focused, and they have a time limitation, typically 18 months. And the idea is the proposal for the working group says, in this time, we are going to develop this thing. It might be a standard, it might be a piece of software, it might be a set of documents, but the idea is it has to be something that's achievable in 18 months, and it needs to be very, very focused. And that's indeed what the Common Standard Group was about. So I'll go back to that history. Dublin 2014, we set up the Active Data Management Plan interest group. It spent some time looking, I think, at the conceptual issues about what do you want from a machine actionable data management plan, but it didn't really go much further. It is the problem often with interest groups that they lead to discussion, but not to action. And certainly by 2016, there were a number of people who felt we were getting far enough in the development of lots of services, certainly our colleagues at the University of California and us at the DCC, and I'm sure others. We needed to actually implement some standard for the interchange of DMPs between systems. That meant there had to be an agreed way of representing these things in a machine readable, ideally machine actionable context. And it didn't exist. There were theories about what it ought to be. And we could have just gone ahead and implemented it in software, but we decided the best way to do this was to be open, to work through the RDA, to get a standard which everybody could agree on. And that's important because if you want something that's machine actionable that involves different systems working together, it's not enough that the DMP developers all agree what that standard is, because the people who implement the CRIS systems, the people who implement all the other systems you want to interact with, also need to be part of accepting that standard. So that led first to an IDCC workshop in 2017, a white paper, and very shortly afterwards, the session at Plenary 9 in Barcelona had the explicit goal, the interest group session, of defining some working groups to address specific tasks. And this definition of the common standard for DMPs was one of the working groups that was set up. It was the first working group to produce output. Some of the proposals there, lots of enthusiasm, great ideas, but they never got taken forward. And I'll come to the importance of that in a moment. So the Common Standards Group, it's time limited. By 2019, it had produced its output, and that means that that group goes into maintenance mode. It can fix and deal with problems, but there aren't any tasks for it to do. So 5 years on, this is where we are. We have a standard that's being maintained. We have an interest group that is yet to spin off further working groups. And, you know, the title of the session is, are we there yet? The question is our work done? In which case, perhaps we should all just wrap up and say, this has been nice, but there's nothing more to do. I don't believe that's the case. I think many of you don't believe that's the case either. So what does need to be done next? And then most importantly, who will make it happen? If we're going to set up further working groups, and there's many who feel that's necessary, bear in mind the experience we had back in 2017 when we discussed this in Barcelona. It takes a degree of dedication and time, and the dedication and time of more than one person to see a working group through, to get that engagement and do that work over 18 months. One person on their own isn't going to be able to do that. So don't underestimate what it takes to do that. And you need a well-defined task. You can't spend your 18 months working out what it is you're going to do. And I think this session and sessions thereafter and probably discussions in between the plenary meetings really are what's essential to take that forward. So I hope that's given you enough context. I've spoken for long enough, and I think now we need to learn a little more about what's happened in that intervening time to lead us into that 40 minutes of discussion where we can decide where do we go next and who's going to make it happen.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for a very good overview. There were some discussions in the chat for the difference between active DMPs and machine actionable DMPs, the interest group and the working group, but you've addressed it, and also Tomasz has helped write a reply as well. So thank you. We move on to the updates starting with Marek.
I will share my slides in a minute. You should be able to see my screen, hopefully. And this well follows up on what Kevin introduced. So I will be talking now a bit briefly about the working group, and then we will have some follow-ups from Tomasz and Eli. So the working group, as was said, is in the maintenance mode, so we should not make any significant changes in the outputs and just maintain them. It also, among other things, mean that we in RDA, as this working group in maintenance mode, get lower priority, for example, when getting sessions. And the issue is that actually there are things that we want to do, and those are some significant changes. And actually, we figured out that these significant changes should be made even before some maintenance task. So the new updates of the standard are made in some ways properly and in basically more machine actionable way. What you may remember from the previous plenaries and previous presentations from me, but also from others, is that we have something prepared already, some like a refresh of the standard specification for machine actionable DMPs, making the standard itself machine actionable, which results in many advantages. For example, generation of the JSON schemas ontologies out of the specification directly, creating some documentation, providing proper contributing guidelines, etc., minting DOIs for releases, and so on. And when looking at the current state of the specification, those would be, of course, really significant changes in the outputs. Still, there are some questions that are open, not yet decided. For example, the specification as it is now, it's in some spreadsheet, then it's turned into README file. So the main source of truth is basically the human readable part. And then you have, for example, the JSON schema based on that. But now, as I said, we want to make it in machine actionable way, but you need to represent that somehow. Should it be RDF? Should it be YAML files? Or should it be something else? And that's something that may be a task for some other working group to figure out and work on that. Also, a huge question that is there for, I guess, quite some time, maybe years, is enabling extensions to the specification. So how to allow to make custom extensions, national domain specific, funder specific extensions of the core standard that we have. And ideally, how to make these extensions be able to reuse what we provide for the core. So for example, the generation of documentation, generation of the JSON schemas, etc. So how to do that, and how to also endorse the extensions, and potentially how to accept some ideas from the extension back to the core. So these are still some open questions, including also what should be the actions behind machine actionable DMPs. And should it be, for example, API specification or something like that? And there are also some to-dos still, even if we have something prepared. So some cleanup, restructure, setting naming conventions, and providing some community website. So we have some home basically just for the standard to continue and to share with the community. So what should be done next? Should we simply do it now? Probably not, because we are based in RDA and want to stay there in compliance with all these interest groups and working groups life cycles. So should we end the current working group and kick off a new one? Which order probably? And what should be actually the next steps? And as Kevin said, there will be the discussion later, but it's also related to the follow-up presentations from Tomasz and Eli, because there are already some ongoing efforts in communities and projects that are related to the machine actionable DMPs, to the standard, and for example, want to use that, extend it, and take advantage of all the things that are prepared. And with that, I will hand over to Tomasz to his presentation, and I am looking forward really to the discussion at the end.
Thanks a lot. I will start my screen sharing, like as you can see it. So Kevin mentioned the plenary in Barcelona, which was one of those memorable plenaries that we keep going back to, and this is kind of the beginning of all these working groups. And I think one other memorable plenary will be Salzburg, and maybe not only because of the food that was served during the plenary, or was not served, but also because we had a very good meeting regarding the Salzburg Manifesto. So back in October, a group of chairs from the working group interest groups, but also basically people who work on creating DMP tools who are active in this area came together, and we said we need to sit down and write down something that explains well what we're doing and why we're doing that, what are our values, because we know that we've been doing it for quite some time, but sometimes in the community it is not clear. It is not clear that all of us collaborate together, all of us have interest in machine actionability, in DMP IDs, and we wanted one place where it's written, and that's why we came up with the Salzburg Manifesto. And you can see in the slide address, activedmps.org. So if you go there, you can find the manifesto. There is also a copy of the manifesto in Zenodo. The link is below. And before I go into the details of the manifesto, maybe a word about this website, activedmps.org, because some of you may remember this URL. Over the last few years, we're trying to have there a list of tools that are active in the area of active DMPs, as we were explaining in the chat. So this was like an umbrella interest group, and now we decided to put the manifesto there. And in the manifesto, we explain who we are, saying that we are the group of people who work on the MADMPs, and basically that we want to have a community where we can openly share our expertise, where there is no need for competition, because the problem of making DMPs active, making DMPs machine actionable is so complex and it takes so much effort that working together on this basically makes sense. We also make a clear commitment to supporting implementation of MADMPs, of DMP IDs. And we are inviting the community. So it's not only to state that, you know, Eli, Kevin, Marek, and Tomasz wants to work together, but it's basically to invite all of you, all of people who are here in this meeting, but also all other events that we collaborate, to basically support the manifesto and to say that these are your values and these are basically the same ideas you have on how we can transform what DMPs are, that they are supposed to be living documents and not just something that we write to make funders happy. So please have a look after the session on this website, Active DMPs. And if you believe this makes sense, what we have put in there, you can also become a supporter. So at the bottom, you can see a list of supporters. You have to create an issue in GitHub, and this is basically for us a way to filter out whether you exist, whether you're a person or whether you're a robot. And some of you might have seen this manifesto because the first time we presented it was during the IDCC conference in February in Edinburgh. We had a workshop there where we discussed with participants about these novel use cases of what can we actually automate, how can we connect DMP tools, and we also revisited 10 principles. So I will provide you some links. We are currently in the process of writing up a report, a proper report from this workshop. But the manifesto was presented there for the first time, and today is the moment when we're presenting to the MDA community. So also in the discussion, please let us know what you think about it, and please support the manifesto directly on the Active DMP's website. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Tomasz. And I think now it's my turn. to finish with the updates. Let me find the slides and share my screen. Okay. Share screen. All right. Good, and now hopefully you can see the screen, right? I'll take it as a yes. Yeah, good, thank you. So last thing we wanted to update you on is a European project that started in February and will last for 3 years, so 36 months. It's called Open Science Trails, Open Science Plan Track Access Pathways. It's not focusing mainly on DMPs, but it's a core of the activities to promote machine actionable DMPs and seek those integrations with other services and enhancement with best practices like DMP IDs that Tomasz mentioned before with the Salzburg Manifesto. So the ambition of this project is to create the integrated flows where we have the scientific information. We improve the services that scientific information is entered and stored throughout the different stages of life cycle, focusing mainly on the planning, tracking, and assessing. So we work with DMP providers, DMP service providers, scientific knowledge graph providers, and fair assessment tool providers to see how we can exchange information with each other and make this integrated research flows turn into reality, basically. And we're a huge consortium. You see here 40 partners representing different sectors, universities, research centers, some companies even. You can see there are research infrastructure, so different domains, and across different countries in Europe and the UK. And while we're all doing that, and is because we realize that we are now working in a siloed landscape, let's say. So we see here the researcher who publishes the digital object, a research output. Mainly, this is publications nowadays. Thankfully, data sharing is part of the good and everyday practices, so we can find their data as well with publications. Sometimes we might find DMPs in a repository, but this is not a standard practice. And whatever is produced by the researcher, it's harvested by scientific knowledge graphs, by huge, let's say, databases. And it's contextualized, and this helps us exploit this data, the harvested data, make the links between them and understand how research performs throughout time and how it evolves. But this is only a snapshot of what we could be able to see from this data and how we could exploit them in broadening it up to looking at the reproducibility of research and other aspects. Because at the same time that researchers produce this data, they might use also different tools like a DMP software to produce a data management plan, which might not be published, and they might also use a fair assessment software that they get their score, their data set is 60% fair, whatever that means, with some guidance on how maybe they can improve the fairness of the data sets. But this information is not available. It might stay on the screen on the interface of this particular software that they have used. So it's not connected to the data set or to another object that might help us realize better, have a better overview of research. And OS Trails aims to break the silos by improving the interoperability across the 3 pillars of our work. These are planning, tracking, and assessing. And I will focus only on the planning stage. For DMPs, we aim to improve the efficacy to understand also how DMPs lead to better research data management practices and to fairer results, more fair results, as well as improving the technical aspects that support machine actionable decisions and processes throughout the life cycle. These are the tools that are onboarded in the project. As you can see, it's Argos, DSW, DAMAP, RDMO, DMP Tooling, and SIG DMP. So we work with different software to provide machine actionable templates for national or thematic communities to work on, to work with the different levels of readiness that this community brings and the different features to enhance them in order to improve the compliance with the MAD-DMP common standard. We're going to have common APIs that we will use to exchange this information and also connect the DMPs with an evaluation service. And these results from the OS Trails will be validated by 24 pilots, representing 17 national infrastructures and 5 science clusters. So life sciences, also sciences and humanities, environment, astrophysics, and I think I said it all, maybe. But that was a very brief overview, because I would like to go to the discussion. I think I am, like, if I stop talking now, I think we're on time for the discussion.
Yeah, I think almost exactly on time. Really good, Ellie.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, let's begin. I think probably, are there any specific questions about what we've heard so far before we, in the discussion, I think wanting to move on more into addressing those questions of what do we do next and what's the context for doing it? So I know particularly, Jenny, you had a question you raised in the chat, I think around OS Trails. Was that answered by the presentation you've seen now? So I'm not sure we saw you there briefly, Jenny, but didn't hear you.
I hope those people who are not hosts can speak, right? It's not like blocked in Uva. We have one hand up, so maybe.
Yeah, so go ahead, Sun Young.
Hi, my name is Sun Young Kim. It's unfortunate that Maria is not here. So I work very closely with her, and I'm a working group member for DMP tool, NIH, DMSP template working group. So when the NIH rolled out this new DMS policy, there was no template for NIH. So we quickly developed one. So it's called the NIH default template now. And then we developed another one, like IC specific template, NIMH. But I'm bringing this up because lots are happening in DMP tool. Maria is actively working on MADMP, MADMSP, or MADMP, but they're already issuing DMP ID as a PID for, DMSP, but they're actually working on platform where people can just upload their DMSP, not written using the DMP tool, but they can issue a DMP ID and then make it machine actionable. So that's really cool. So I was looking forward to hearing more about it. It's like an ongoing project. They kicked off and it ended probably at the end of this year, and then results will come out. And there are lots of exciting things happening right now. I shared one link shared in DMP tool blog about the machine actionable. The research output is what's going to make it happen. So when you get a DMP ID, you have to link it to ORCID ID. So that's the first PID. And then, if you get the DMP ID, you get additional tab called the follow-up tab. So you can change the status from planned to awarded, and then you can start adding your research outputs. So it's already linked to re3data.org. So you can, link to your data repository, and then you can add a UI for your, protocols or publication, all that stuff. So that's all part of this machine actionable DMP. But I just want to know how her activity fits into the overall interest group of RDA. I'm new to RDA. So since this is happening in Europe, I was never able to attend. This is the first time I'm attending because offered virtually. So just forgive me if I don't know everything about it, but I just wanted to see how this initiative is fitting into overall scheme or goal of RDA. So, thank you.
Okay, so that is an interesting whole set of points there that Sung Young has raised that I think touch perhaps on both the point that you raised, Marek, in your presentation, and to an extent what Jenny has asked about in the chat. So Sung Young has described particular essentially implementation type activities that are happening within the context of a single tool, the DMP tool, which are in a sense ahead of, well, in some cases using what we have in the standards already, and in other cases ahead of what we have in the standards. And then there's the question of, there are multiple ways of doing this kind of technical work. You either try and implement first and then standardize, or you try and standardize first and then implement, or even you can do both in parallel. The DMP tool team have chosen OneBreed. I think that there's interesting questions about how you're approaching that in OS Trails. I know my strong feeling is that I very much want to do any of that standardization in the open and in RDA. I really, from our point of view, there's no other way to go. But Tomasz, go ahead. You want to...
Yeah, I wanted to reply to this point about the DMP IDs, and basically this fits into the discussion on the relation between the DMP tools and scholarly or scientific knowledge graphs, SKGs. This is one of the things we have in the OS Trails. I'm the technical coordinator for OS Trails. And we are discussing right now what kind of information from MADMPs can be put into the SKGs, whether this will be the SKGs requesting the information from a DMP tool. Very likely not that the DMP tool is pushing anything to SKG, because no SKG will allow it. And by saying SKG, I here mean, for example, the data site or Crossref, as it's written in the blog post, or for example, the OpenAIRE knowledge graph, or anything which is domain specific. Yeah, because we have this, in Europe, we have these research infrastructures and they have their own knowledge graphs. Yeah, so this is all right now on the table. And natural thing for us is to use RDA as a platform to ask these questions. So some of the discussions, I think, for example, on the knowledge graphs will be happening in the SKG interoperability framework group. Because when we talk about things in the DMPs and in SKGs, let's say we're describing these connections between the people, projects, data sets, and so on. This is part of what our specification MADMP does. And the knowledge graphs and the interoperability framework does more or less the same thing. So there is no reason why we should be modeling the same thing, but in different places, like, differently for DMPs, differently for SKGs. Especially as by the end of the day, we want to pass the information from one place to the other place. So RDA is absolutely a perfect tool to have all these discussions. in this case, for people from two sides of the pond.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the examples you give there, Thomas, particularly say that variety of scientific knowledge graphs. I mean, it stresses the importance of standards. We don't just want to solve the problem for one particular case. We want to solve the general problem of how do you move information around like that. And indeed, even that issues you say about are we trying to model one system requesting information from another, or one system pushing information at somebody else? And there are different, I think that's one of the things we haven't really addressed so far in the standards. So far we've talked about, if you're going to move this information, here is a machine readable way, a machine actionable way to do it. But that next step of then sort of thinking which elements of these are being pushed, which elements of these are being requested. But what's clear so far is that the discussion, clearly there are a number of groups who effectively need to work on extensions to that common standard. You need to do it in OS Trails. It sounds as if the folks in DMP Tool do as well, and I think we've got an interest in doing that. And that would suggest to me that we really do need to look at, well, yeah, I think it's the question you raised, Marek. Is it creating a new working group with specific targets? Is it reactivating the working group we've got and saying it now has a new task? I'm not sure what the process is there. But I'm also interested in whether we've got other ideas to pursue. So one thing that's dawned to me, as we begin to have multiple systems that are going to effectively claim compliance to these things we developed in one way or another, many of us do, it would be good, I think, both to test those claims and also for our own internal purposes, to begin to develop what are effectively test sets of DMPs, all of which conform to the standard, some of which perhaps test some of the edge cases of that standard, to be able to say, here is an example data suite, as it were, that if you claim compliance with the standard, you should be able to process in a certain way. And I think it's quite a complex problem, given that we're often talking about compliance that only uses different bits of it. That's it's not something that can be done in a week. I think it would be sensible just to think of a group dealing just with that problem. But I don't know if there's the appetite for it, and again, it's whether there's the time for it. But I think there's no question in my mind it'd be really valuable, even for anyone doing development, just for internal testing, having a test suite like that you use to continually check after every time you do an upgrade or something, still working. So go ahead, Sun Young.
Yeah. So when we talk about, also Thomas raised hand too. When we talk about like standardization or standards in DMP, so I'm going to use the DMP tool as an example because I'm most familiar with that. So we'll start with the PID, right? So if you want to make DMP or DMSP machine actionable, you have to have a PID, right? HIT. So ORCID ID for author, not necessarily.
Well, you don't have to have one. It's good to have one for the DMP, but you don't necessarily have to have one for the DMP. But you're mentioning PIDs that are inside the DMP itself, like
Right.
the ORCIDs.
So,
and they certainly are necessary.
Right. So when we typically talk about standards, we're talking about ontology, right? Or some standards. So for this case, I guess I'm a little confused about how we want to define standards for DMP. Are we talking about elements of a DMP, or because if you use the NIH image, for example, there are 6 specific elements: the data type, and then standards and tools, and then repository, access to distribution and stuff, and oversight and compliance. Are we talking about those elements, or having like a specific PIDs as a way to make DMSP machine actionable, or specific ontology we want to apply?
So I think it's potentially all of those things, but I'm sure Thomas, Shelley, Marek, you can add to that. But very briefly, I mean, the standard is both describing the elements, but it's also saying something about how the expression of those, which actually means, in fundamental terms, when you're transmitting this thing over the wire, what does it look like? Because it's one thing for you and I to agree, oh, we will have these elements in our DMP, but that doesn't mean two pieces of software can talk to each other unless they also agree on their representation, whether it's serialized JSON, whether it's an XML, whether there are different ways of doing this. And potentially, the elements, you can be very specific in saying, this thing, it's not just a description of a person, it is the ORCID, or it is one of these sets of identifiers. And you may or may not be specific about what ontologies you use. And you can see the common standard is very specific about those. In some cases, it talks not just about what's in an element, but how that element must be expressed. For instance, times and dates so date or date time format. But in other cases, it's silent. And those are definitely some of the areas where I'm sure a number of us think actually we could do more here about both. I'm saying that. So I don't know, Thomas, do you want to add more? And if not, then we can go to Leighton.
There is some other hand up, so I will let it,
Okay, so Leighton, then Ellie, then Ricardo.
So thanks, appreciate that. So Sun-Young, so I recently moved from Department of Transportation to Centers for Disease Control back in January. So I'm still in with federal space, and in the OSTP subcommittee on open science, we're actually going through right now and looking at the elements of data management plans and which ones we want to specify, which ones we want to change, which ones we want to add. Now, one of the problems with the template that US federal funded researchers have been working with since 2013 when it came from NSF is it was like, we only want a 2-page narrative DMP. So it was all fill-in text fields. It was all, which is hard to parse, which is hard to do analysis on. So one of the things that we've been talking about is specifically the Machine Actionable Data Management Plan common format, and also making more of those fields atomic, pull down menus, all of those sorts of things so that they can be analyzed, so that they can be standard. But that, because it's US federal, that's going to take a couple of years to accomplish. But it's also a project I'm working on very specifically at Centers for Disease Control using our project tracking database, trying to get the same thing out the other end, a machine actionable data management plan, which I think we may be able to do by the end of the year if I get enough development time. So, but all of those things are fluid, right? What we learn about all of these elements over time changes and evolves, and how we want to express those elements changes and evolves. So I don't think we'll ever quite be done with this project, but I think this is an important step. Thanks, appreciate it.
I just want to add one thing quickly to that, because you were just talking about NIH. So NIH default template that came out in 2022 is a free text format, but they did release the FTP pilot template in 2023. That's more structured. So there's Alpha, which is a fillable PDF. There's a Bravo, which is the Word file, but they do have a drop-down menu. But still, it's still text form. It's not like a link to PID or standard. We can pull from fairsharing.org, for example, or standard ontology. So to make it machine actionable, I think we have to have those drop-down menu linked to some sort of database that machine can read. I just wanted to add that.
So if you don't mind, I'd rather think of the rest of this discussion, trying to deal with how we solve a problem with an individual funder and how they want things is probably beyond the scope of this group, really. But so I want to go, Ellie, you had your hand raised and you've lowered it. Was that intentional, or do you want to come in now?
Yes, just to give the floor to Ricardo, and then I can say a few things after Tomasz.
Okay, so Ricardo next, then Tomasz, then Ellie. Yeah?
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm just super curious how to approach this problem in the user cases, because, for example, we got some device given by DataCite, and it's super interesting that they have a license field that almost nobody feel. So if I want to analyze what's going on with the data produced by some institution, I have no idea. And it's the same case with DOIs given by Crossref. If I'm going to check them, they have no affiliation, they have no license, and etc. So in theory, they are supposed to collect a lot of information that could be interesting, but in the real world, it's only from the primary source given. But if you go to the secondary source, the tertiary source, you have no information. And in my university, we try to create a DMP we don't have any unit of software development or something like that. So we live in Google Drive, Microsoft Cloud, and a lot of Word paper documents. So we try to generate a DMP related to how it could improve the research management in my institution. So for our case, it's super important not only to know who are funding a project, but when it's not funded project. Mm-hmm. Because in the articles area, you also have a number for a funder, but you don't have a code if you don't have funds.
Exactly.
So
and no way of indicating, is this just missing, or is it actually we know there's not? Yeah. Are
related to funders, priority areas, etc. So I was checking the DMP you share in GitHub, and it's also the same. The whole information is related. What about you have funds? But I can't realize what happens if you don't have money to make research, and even though you are doing research. So I guess it's more maybe the same way I saw the use, why use or don't use DOI, how to make it more a live document or administration document related to the user cases, not simply how much information you put it on. That's my comment.
Okay. Thanks very much. Just one to Thomas. Can I just check I understood one of your points? I think the first one you made there, Ricardo, correctly. You talked about looking for license information in DOIs and distinguish between the primary and the secondary source. So are you saying that this is a case where, let's say, I have a data set on, let's say, my institutional repository, and if you go to that landing page of the data set, you will see a license. But that I've created a DOI and I've failed to embed in that DOI the information about that license, even though I could have done that. Yep.
Yeah, so it's just an example. Okay. So maybe we can have the information, but we are really using it in the whole system? Or not?
I understand. And I think that's a really good example because it links into, I think, if we're going to do further work on the standard, cases where essentially this is when you can profile or constrain the way a standard is used. So rather than simply saying you put a DOI here, we say a DOI and certain notionally optional fields in that DOI actually need to be completed for this to be useful. But that's one way of dealing with that. Tomasz.
Okay, I have a couple of comments because I was listening to what you were saying, taking notes. So I'm jumping a bit. One thing I wanted to maybe address, I will share my screen, is about the MADMPs and the specification. So there was a lot of effort. You can see my screen, right? The one with the specification.
Yeah. Maybe a bit small, but for many people, but yeah, we can see it, I think.
But there was a lot of effort basically in the working group to come up with some common denominator. And this is the agreement. This is not definitely something which is exhaustive. And that's why we're talking about all these extensions. And also we gave a lot of freedom to different tool providers to implement it the way they want. So one of the examples I have in here is this DMP ID. And what the specification says is that a DMP must have an identifier, but it doesn't say it has to be DOI, it has to be handler or whatever you pick. You see here is the type for the DMP identifier. something. It has to exist. It can be a DO, it can be something different. And because different tools implement the recommendation as they want, as it fits to their data model, then these are these incompatibilities that Kevin was mentioning. And here we have kind of a problem, because this is a balance between having a common denominator and leaving the room for the tools to implement the parts they want and they can support, versus being strict on which fields must be provided, and then, for example, making it impossible for some of the tools to implement them without doing a serious re-engineering. That's one thing I wanted to show. Second thing was about what Marek was saying about these working groups, potential working groups, and links to OS Trails. One of the things we're currently considering, and maybe we'll write a charter for a working group, or maybe a session in the next plenary, is the common API for the DMP tools. Because what we did with this common standard was to come up on a data model, or let's say a way to express information, not a template, but information. But the way to make the DMPs really useful and really use actively would be to provide interfaces in our tools where you could fetch the information on demand. So not exporting the whole document, but saying, give me an information whether this DMP has a data set that uses a CC BY license, for example. Yeah. Some tools have something like this. For example, DMP tool has an API. I know DAMAP doesn't have one. So this is something that I can see a potential of how we can move the standards towards the API. And one more thing, because the colleagues from NIH were mentioning NIH template a few times. In 2021, we were doing this exercise as a follow-up from the hackathon, where we were mapping different DMP templates to the DA common standard. And here you can see this Excel. I have sent it in the chat. So you have this Horizon 2020 from Europe, but you have also the NIH template. And the left columns on the left-hand side, you have the sections and questions that are asked in the template. And then you have these columns where we say whether the common standard fits completely, partially. And also we have some comments like which fields map to the questions, or maybe what fields we have to add to make it fit. And basically for the NIH, we got basically a full mapping between the recommendation and the template. Same was for NSF. It was much more problematic on the European side, especially with Science Europe and local funders. And that's what I wanted to say. So thank you for listening.
Okay, Ellie. And there's some questions in the chat as well. I think we need to pick up now as well, but go ahead, Ellie. Yes, okay, just to finish also commenting on the previous observations. The DMP ID does not mean that the DMP is machine actionable. Machine actionable means that we have these actions defined, and we can now use tools to automate these actions or semi-automate those actions. So we first need to define those actions. We then need to look at what the DMP common standard currently provides us with. Can we use it as it is? Do we need to extend to provide more information that we can then parse, and we can then request from different sources so that we get them and perform this action for the users? Either the user might be the researcher who might want to, I don't know, use a DMP tool to check also while writing the DMP plan, to know how fair their practices are while doing it. So they might want to look at what a fair assessor might have to give to them. So incorporate fair metrics, for example, inside the DMP. So this is an action I want to know while using the DMP tool, for example, how fair my research will be at the end. So we need to define all those actions and then, work around that. So maybe actually, Thomas, that's a good idea for the next mandate of the working group, the common standard. but I think, I mean, there's some other interesting points I think have been brought up that we need to just bear in mind in the development. One, I think that came out the specific example from Ricardo talking about, unfunded research, and that Thomas raised more generally, is that we want to be aware of creating a standard where we, require information that in some contexts there's a really good reason for that information not to exist or not to be applicable. And I think that's one thing that the group did a really good job of on the first development of the common standard of, the things that are mandatory are things that there's no question you need to know this. The things and the distinction between things that can occur one time, with the cardinality of one, things with multiple cardinality. And I think for all the groups, for all of us, we need to bear in mind and it's one of the great advantages, I think, of working in RDA, that we avoid a narrow mindset where we're saying, I'm solving my problem in my context, because somebody else will say, yeah, but it's different for me. Ricardo pointed out how it's different for him in some contexts. I think, Sun Young, you raised the question about the GMP IDs, and I think you said in the chat, aren't they just data site DOIs? And as Thomas pointed out, well, they could be, but there's more than one way of creating a PID. They aren't all DOIs, even not all DOIs are issued by DataCite, but there are completely different standards for that, and we have to take account of the fact that we can't require the use of a particular infrastructure, and there's no need to for the context of this standard. But at the same time, as you say, Ellie, we still want something where we're specific enough that you can say, I can do something with this. Machines can achieve something. It's got to be general enough that it'll work in all these different contexts. And I think we can't avoid the fact that we still need to, as Leighton observed, moving, and all of us know, changing funders' minds is a slow process. And in the short term, we're still going to have this tension between a funder wanting a document that looks like this, we wanting some machine actionable core that looks like that, and a user or a set of users who need to enter information into something and effectively produce both of those things. Produce a document that's going to keep their funder happy, produce a set of actionable elements that we can use. And ideally, and this is beyond what this group can do, we can design tools that do both of those jobs well at one time. So I'm very conscious of the time, and we've got about 15 minutes left, I think, before, or perhaps even less than, perhaps about 10 minutes before we get to the wrapping up. And I think we're all keen that before we get there, that we've got some decisions and some people to take that forward. And my feeling is that there's no question we do need to, that common standard needs some revision work, that we either revive the existing group or create a new one. We can ask for guidance from RDA. That's more a procedural thing than anything else. We don't need to worry about it now about how we do that. And so people are willing to do that. And I'm assuming that will include at least some of the current co-chairs, but it's open to others here to get involved in that. But are there other, and I see a point coming up in the chat from Amy, I'll pick that up in a moment. Are there other concrete things that we think fit that idea of a working group that's something concrete to achieve in 12 to 18 months, that people would at least be willing to work to put a proposal on? And remember that the way RDA works is that we'll put together a proposal. It has to go out to community review to allow people to raise objections to it or to change it before it gets formally approved. Tomasz.
So I have one idea for a working group, but there is a question from Amy in the chat. So I don't quite understand the question. So Amy, if you could explain.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. I think Kevin understands the question.
Well, yeah, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, Amy. I mean, you're asking if we're going to work with the funders group that we have
Yeah,
in RDA.
I mean,
yeah?
to the point of it's hard to change funders' minds, right? We do, this is one of the advantages of RDA is we do have a collection of funders, you know, who are actively participating in RDA. And so, you know, as these working group is formed, I would hope and encourage that one of its goals is to have a participant from that funders group, or to have a plan to participate and engage with that funders group.
It's a really good point, because we did actually at the
Helsinki.
and going back even further back at that again, I'm mentioning Barcelona. When we were setting up the working groups, we had a number of funders in the room then, but I think a number of them didn't feel that they were able to well, what I think the Welcome did engage, I think, with the work that eventually led into some of the stuff that's happening in the context of software about thinking about output management more generally. But it would be worth at least finding some way to engage them, even if it's not directly in the working group. We did have an opportunity, I think, whether it was Helsinki before that, where we spoke to the funders group, didn't we?
So when when the recommendation was produced, we talked to the funders forum. I think that's how it's called.
Yeah.
Basically, they all said, very nice, we like your job, but I think we were at that time still ahead of time, yeah?
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to suggest was, as I keep hearing from different funders, you know, like people pass the information, the topic of automating the evaluation of DMPs is coming up more and more. And this could be a good moment to maybe talk to our funders at RDA, but also this could be an opportunity for a working group to discuss what does it mean to evaluate the DMP, to what extent can we automate it, because if we agree, okay, we have the MA DMPs, there are certain things we can check automatically or prepare the information so that there is less work for the reviewers, because what I hear from some of the funders is that they don't really want to read these DMPs anymore. They would be more happy to have a score saying whether the actions described by a DMP make sense or were performed. And they don't necessarily want to hire extra personnel to receive these DMPs. And when it comes to this, the question of the review of the DMPs, the question is, what is a good DMP? So the one which is complete, basically, if it's answering all the questions the funder had, or if, for example, the data described by the DMP is fair itself, yeah? So this would be a very nice topic for RDA to talk more on this conceptual aspect. What does it mean to evaluate the DMP, yeah? And not to come up with an evaluation rubric, yeah? But what are the goals of the reviewers and what can be automated, given that we have MA DMPs?
That's great. So you've had at least one really positive response in the chat there from Aki, I hope you're pronouncing your name correctly, Aki McFarlane, from the Welcome. I know we have at least one other funder in the room. I'm not going to call you out if you want to remain silent. So I think perhaps then another action for us to take, and I'm leaving ahead bit here, is not so much the setting up a working group, but finding out, perhaps through speaking again to the funders forum, what's the right way to engage funders in this? Is it by having actual membership of the working group, or is it through having some periodic way to stand out with funders whether what we're doing, for instance, in evaluation, I know there are really different opinions amongst funders about whether they want to do that, and if so, how. Okay, Sun Young, again to you.
I totally agree with what Thomas said, but I just want to add one more spin on it. So, you know, from the funder's perspective, the reason for, you know, kind of mandating DMSP is to make sure they comply with this. So compliance is a big part of it. So the best advantage of machine action with DMP is it allowed them to quickly check, you know, if they comply. You know, there's a research output coming out of DMSP. So, you know, when you make a pitch to funders, I think you want to use the compliance part. That's what I want to kind of throw in. So because it allowed them, by making DMSP machine actionable, it allowed them to quickly check the compliance of a data management sharing plan. So that's all I wanted to share. But it was a great idea. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Just before we move on to you, Christine, I want to draw everyone's attention to a comment that Jenny Ostrop has put in the chat about work that's been going on in Norway, and it's that you know, she's summarising there, particularly that you know, looking at the differences between what happens in tools in templates and in guides, I think is really useful insight there. Jenny, do you want to say a bit more about that? I'm not summarising it very well.
Thank you, Kevin. So we are currently in a project in Norway where we try to align our DMP guidance, and at the same time, we're also evaluating different DMP tools. And something that we found in this work is that it's important to separate between what a tool enables in theory and what the specific template requires. And we also found that there is a lot of different stakeholders and they have partially opposite needs. And then we have researchers that need user-friendliness and relevance, while a funder might want to track outputs, which is not the same interest as, for example, an institution that wants to raise awareness that guidelines are followed very early on in the project.
Yeah, I think that, as you say, those diverging stakeholder expectations and how to reconcile them.
And then trying to map that towards the standard is a very interesting task.
To say the least, yeah. So Christine, sorry, you waited quite a long time.
My point is just going to reinforce what's just been said, is that from the French funders' point of view, they think they can evaluate certain aspects of DMPs, and they want to know whether the FAIR principle or in general or the open science principle have been applied, but they really think that it's more relevant for scientific experts than to evaluate whether the FAIR principle applied to a specific domain has been really applied. So, yeah.
Okay.
So this is exactly the different goals of the review, and this is what will be really exciting to have to discuss at the RDA.
Indeed, yeah, and yeah, I'm just reflecting again in the time I've done reviews of DMPs. I think it's I'm clearly looking for something. I'm often just trying to get a sense of whether somebody knows what they're talking about, to be honest, and the details don't matter, the machine actionability doesn't matter, but that feeling of do you have any sense of what data you're going to be dealing with, and do you know what matters in it, and are you going to take care of it?
But I personally see a chance in getting rid of all these PDFs and half of the questions asked if we give to the funders a new toy, and the new toy will be the result of the assessment, and then we can reduce the scope of what is being asked to only the relevant things. Yeah. Okay.
So I think we're just getting to the point where really we should be summarizing the next steps. Just one last point that's been raised in the chat that I think might feed into that between conversation between Majid and Amy about the use of DMPs in the there's another interest group looking at evaluation of research. So potentially a crossover here between the work the two interest groups are doing. That suggests to me that amongst the actions we should be looking at is, I don't know, what would that be? Perhaps some of those involved in those groups should we just be having a conversation between the group chairs? Is it a case of looking at, do we have overlap between membership of those groups? Because if we do, that membership overlap should be enough to make sure that what the two groups are doing is aligned. And I think that so what should we be looking at there? What are our next steps in terms of the interaction between those two groups?
What I think that's addressed to me, perhaps.
You're one of the folks.
I'm
it's
one of
addressed to,
them.
yes.
So I'll step in and talk very quickly. I think, right now, as you point out, Kevin, we do have an overlap between parties, and it's something where machine actionable DMPs, to the point Jenny has raised, it's very dependent on what the intent of that DMP is, whether or not it could be useful as a facet of evaluation of research. And as that, it should certainly be part of that conversation to consider what are those aspects that exist to potentially evaluate research. What are the things that we have available that we could use in that evaluation of research? And so as the work continues within this group to think about what those machine actionable DMPs look like, how they might be used, who might use them for which purposes, I think there's definitely a place to connect with that evaluation of research group to make sure that machine actionable DMPs remain part of that conversation, remain one of those elements that can be considered as part of the evaluation of research structure or framework.
Okay. So I'm understanding that correctly, Amy, you feel that you know already that we've got enough overlap between the group membership that this is probably...
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
definitely bring it to the evaluation of research group, let them know what's up and what you're doing, and there we go.
Okay. Well, that's done. But because that, I mean, one simple thing, but I'm sure we can just simply ask the RDA Secretariat to tell us, how many people have expressed interest in both those groups, and that would be an interesting. I'd be quite happy to take that action on.
Oh, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Because I'm just asking somebody else to do something. That's an easy action. On a more serious point, so
I think we have 5 minutes.
Mhm.
I think we
Ellie?
only have 5 minutes,
Exactly.
unfortunately, although the discussion is very, very, very nice.
And so I'm trying to make clear that we have, what are our next steps. So the putting together of the proposal for the next step with the machine actionable with common standards group, I think is very clear, and I think probably working again through the Secretariat to pick up on Amy's point about how, can we have the opportunity to speak to the funders at the next funders forum, or potentially is there some other way to interact with that group even before, because it's quite a long wait until Costa Rica. And I think we might want to find an effective way of speaking with them before then.
So I also wanted to say that very likely we will try to use the mailing list, and we will spam you, and I think we should organize an extra meeting to discuss the scope of what we were proposing here. Because as I said, for example, in the OS Trades project, we will have this need for the API for this discussion of knowledge graphs, evaluation, and so on. We don't want to do that in the isolation. And I think best is when we simply organize a dedicated meeting for that. Once we have also a little bit more idea of what are exactly the problems and how a potential charter could look like, yeah?
Yeah, and I think thank you so much. And that's a very specific action. Yeah, we don't want to wait until the Costa Rica plenary. We do need, and it needs to be a group meeting, I think, and I think formally describing it as an interest group meeting, because we're effectively spinning off another working group, even if it's really just continuing the same working groups, for the right way to do that. So I think a collective action on us, the group chairs, to make that meeting happen. It may need to be more than one meeting, but let's at least organize one, and making clear that it's all about defining those next steps. That's important. Is there anything else that people felt from the meeting today that was a very clear a thing we need to do, and or somebody who's saying, I am willing to do this thing? Does anyone want to work with me? I don't want to put actions on other people. Jenny, I mean, there's a lot of discussion in there in the chat about what you're learning from that work you're doing in Norway, and it really does strike me that's I have been looking at those reports. Jenny shares some of the links to this on Twitter a while ago, and it's really interesting what I've seen come out of there so far. I would suggest an action on all of us actually to follow those links and read some of those documents, because it really could help us, I think, inform the next steps.
Please provide feedback. That's very valuable to us. So something that we found in our work is that we have this very technical approach. And then we have, on the other hand, the awareness raising approach that many of the support people are very engaged in. And it's sometimes hard to meet them. And I think that's where the potential is, having a data management plan as an active item.
Okay. So we've got, I think, 3 clear actions. Looking at my co-chairs, Tomasz, Ellie, is there anything else you'd like to say at this point, or something you think we've missed?
No, I think everyone agrees that we need more active DMPs. So I will, I will look at the Active DMP's website in a week from now to see who of you have signed it, because I see that we are all, aligned on that. But thank you very much. That was really, really nice to hear, your input and get the idea of how DMPs, active DMPs could look like in different contexts.
Thank you. Well, in a sense, you've just given us all another action there, Ellie. Go and visit the Active DMP website if you haven't done already. Sign up. And if you feel for whatever reason that you can't sign up to that, I think it'd be really interesting to hear why. What is it about it that causes you an issue? Okay, but I think it just remains then to thank everyone who's spoken today for the presentations. As Ellie made clear, we'll put in links to the presentations in the notes of the session, so it will be available to all of you, and indeed to those who weren't able to join us for the session today. And thanks to all of you who've attended, contributed, and some future thanks to those of you who are going to follow up on those actions that we've agreed now. Yeah. And hopefully in 18 to 24 months' time, we're going to be talking about the outputs of those groups that we've agreed to establish today. I really look forward to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.